What is up, everybody out there in podcast land? It is a beautiful, slightly chilly night here in the upper Midwest. Friday night, April the 19th, 2024. It is time for episode 140 of The Fortress of Rock. I am your gracious and humble host, the Maestro Kevin Crane, and as always, thankful to have you aboard for this rock and roll extravaganza that'll take us through about 90 minutes of the best in the old, the current, and the future of rock and roll. And we have got a jam-packed episode for you. We have got a lot of new music, a lot of news, a lot of old stuff when it comes to I Want to Go Back. So let's get into it right now. News of the world. Segment 1, our tribute to Freddie Mercury and Queen. And we start off with devastating news. Now, I have said that there are acts, there are performers, there are bands that I have gotten into later on in my life. When I was growing up, you guys know, late 70s, early 80s, that was my wheelhouse growing up. Those were the bands, the performers. Billy Squier, The Cars, Van Halen. Those were the performers, the bands that formed what I am. They made me the maestro. But then later on in life, you widen your taste. You open things up a bit. You become more contemplative about mortality and maturity and fatherhood and serious issues that you didn't really care about back when you were 17, 18 years old. You didn't want to be bothered. I've talked about Bruce Springsteen and how I came to appreciate Bruce Springsteen more later on in life, even though I still have my problems and issues with him. But guess who? Another band wrangling through legal issues that we've talked about within the last few months. They have really influenced me a lot when it comes to older music over the last 5 to 10 years. And then, of course, the Allman Brothers Band. Now, I always had an affinity for Southern rock and roll. I did. I will admit it, but I kind of came in on the back end of it. Being a child of the late 70s and early 80s, you can probably figure out the bands that pulled me in when it came to Southern rock and roll. It was 38 Special, it was Molly Hatchet, and then I started to get Leonard Skinner. Then finally, years and years later, I grew to appreciate the absolute greatness of the Allman Brothers Band. And as I reference the Allman Brothers, you know I'm talking about the passing of Dickey Betts. Not a shocking death, but at the same time, another one of those losses in the realm of rock and roll that just hurts and hurts badly and hurts deeply. Dickey Betts, of course, one of the co-founders of the Allman Brothers Band, a legend in his own right. He will be sorely missed, as will the Allman Brothers. Just tears me apart when I think about the fact that I didn't give the Allman Brothers Band enough credit back when I should have. And back when maybe, possibly, I don't know, if I'd had a shot at seeing them live, I could have. Easily one of the greatest live bands of all time. Luckily, I got to see Greg Allman once solo live. But yeah, losing Dickey Betts, that hurts. That hurts the Maestro. Everybody here at the Fortress of Rock is in mourning, wearing black, even Doc Brown. He's gotten rid of the white lab coat, and he's got the black trench coat on for later on when we do I Want to Go Back. The Allman Brothers clan has taken so many body blows when it comes to death. And this is just another one that, unfortunately, sadly puts another nail in the casket of the Allman Brothers Band. Thoughts and prayers out to everybody left as we lose yet another integral part of the Allman Brothers. Now, another band that not quite as impactful. My man Eddie Trunk loves them with a passion. Word has come down that UFO is officially done and over. It's not surprising, considering their leader, Phil Mogg, had a 2022 heart attack that cut short what was supposed to be their farewell tour. UFO, ironically, as I talked about with the Allman Brothers, another band that I got into later on in life. When I was growing up, UFO was always in the background. They didn't get a lot of radio airplay, at least where I am and where I grew up. So we didn't hear a lot from UFO. We didn't hear Lights Out. We didn't hear the great music from UFO. And then I mentioned Eddie Trunk. Respect the man beyond all belief. UFO, one of his favorite bands. I decided let's give them a shot. Let's give them a listen. Not bad. Not bad at all. Very, very good stuff. But unfortunately, UFO is officially over and done. All right, the negative stuff for the most part out of the way. It's like the Band-Aid. Just rip it right off. Let's move on to other rock and roll news of the week. So we move on to mourning and tributes to lost rock stars and rock stars who will no longer be performing, to stupidity, to the idiocy out there in the world of rock and roll. No Roger Waters this week, so we'll start off with CBS. I don't care if you're obsessed with Tracker and Ghosts and CSI and CSI Evansville and CSI Des Moines. I don't care. If you commit to putting out a special featuring Billy Joel, his 100th performance at Madison Square Garden, part of his residency that is ending soon, you do not cut it short in the middle of Piano Man. And this, another sign of where our society is right now. The oblivious nature of the people that are working in media right now boggles my mind. So the excuses started to come the next day when fans said, how can you do this? How can you cut this short in the middle of Piano Man, one of the classic songs of all time? And there were people that said, oh, get over it. You can go online and you can watch a video of him performing Piano Man. That's not the point. The point is the ineptitude and the stupidity of CBS for not planning this whole situation out. Yes, we had the Masters. The most important golf tournament of the year ran long. So that bumped the start of Billy Joel at Madison Square Garden back. But here's where I have a major problem with this. How many times have we seen a football game or a sporting event push local news back? But in this case, all of a sudden, this line gets drawn in the sand. Oh, we can't push local news back, so we've got to cut this Billy Joel special off in the middle of Piano Man because we got to get to the 11 o'clock news. I'm sorry, if you are under the age of 70 years old, why do you care about local news? There is something, believe it or not, called the internet. If you need an update on local news or local weather, because local sports doesn't matter anymore, you go on the internet. But CBS, NBC, ABC, they still act like local news is such a great revenue driving part of their existence that they have got to destroy their programming in order to kowtow to local news. Now, this all happened last Sunday, April the 14th. As you're listening to me, this should post about an hour before. They will re-air on tonight on CBS, April the 19th at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. They will re-air the quote-unquote entire show, which is BS because they're not going to air the entire show. There's supposedly 5 songs that they're not going to air because, again, they have to fit it into a neat little package that fits in their time frame with the requisite commercials with no spillage. Frustrating beyond belief. And I understand the idiots out there who are saying, okay, just go put the CD and go listen to it on Spotify. Go watch a video on YouTube. That's not the point. How about we expect some professionalism from these networks and the people that are working for them? That's the point. But we're not done talking about over-the-air television yet, the big networks. This is going to be fun. Oh, kids, this is going to be fun. Note sarcasm. We've been waiting. The fan vote is over. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The inductees. We've been waiting. We want to see Foreigner get in. We want to see Peter Frampton and Ozzy Osbourne get in. Even though we shouldn't care because it's a fallacy and a sham. So now the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does, and they say, well, we're going to do something new this year. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees will be announced Sunday night, April the 21st, 2 days from now, as this drops, during, wait for it, American Idol. Wow. I don't even want to speculate on what's going to happen, but the fact this is happening on American Idol tells me that once again, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame giving the middle finger to true rock and roll fans everywhere and anywhere. So expect to see Mariah Carey get inducted, Eric B. and Rakim, and A Tribe Called Quest, everybody and anybody to upset and piss off the true rock and roll fan. One more negative, and I promise we move on to more positive stuff. Now, I'm not into Coachella. I'm not into the festivals. I don't care about any of them. I am not going to sit for 8 hours a day over a weekend or 2 weekends, whatever it might be, to listen to mediocre music just to maybe get to one band that I like. But this is somebody we've noted in the past. Actually, back at the end of 2023, Blur. And Blur's leader is Damon Albarn. Damon Albarn didn't like the reception his band got at Coachella last weekend. He ripped into the apathetic crowd on Saturday night's show, which would have been April the 13th. Did not like the fact they didn't participate in the sing-alongs. Whatever he tried to do to get them engaged, they just didn't want any part of it. And so he basically said, "You'll never see us again." That's a quote. Quote, "You'll never see us again," unquote. Now, I mentioned we talked about him recently. Back at the end of 2023, he ripped into the Rolling Stones. And how they, even though their latest album, very, very good album, Hackney Diamonds, referencing the Hackney district in England, and Albarn's, oh, they never did anything for that district for Hackney. What has Blur ever done for the world of rock and roll? And I see people out there posting on social media, show some respect for Blur, show some respect for Damon Albarn. What have they ever done in America for rock and roll? I don't know anybody who gives two rip craps about Blur. Yet Damon Albarn acts like they are the pinnacle of music. I know overseas, in Great Britain, it's kind of like Oasis, but Oasis at least has a footprint here in the United States. What's the story? Morning Glory at least made an impact. I don't understand over here in America why we care what Blur thinks and what Damon Albarn thinks. He comes off like a little petulant, spoiled brat rock and roll child. Go away. I don't think Coachella will miss you if you don't come back. All right, let's put our happy faces on for the last 10 minutes here in News of the World. Beatles fans, rejoice! Peter Jackson and Disney Plus have got another Beatles treat for you. On Disney Plus, May the 8th, the restored, remastered version of the movie Let It Be will hit. And even though I'm not the biggest Beatles fan in the world, This is great. This is great for rock and roll fans. I'm happy for Beatles fans. Good news, good stuff. So if you are a Disney Plus subscriber and you are a Beatles fanatic, have at it starting May the 8th. Now, some people would say this is a complete 180, but in my twisted rock and roll mind, this is kind of an equivalent. Beatles, Rat. Rat, Beatles, about the same. I don't know how this slipped under my radar, but there is a new CD, MP3, whatever you prefer to buy. I don't think vinyl is available, but rarities from Rat coming out May the 31st. Studio outtakes, demos, live songs. And my understanding is this features the first ever recorded version of the band trying to work through the initial takes of Round and Round. So look for Rat rarities May the 31st. Now, I've told you guys I have my issues, my problems with the Billboard charts, how they've been mishandled over the last 30 years, denigrating rock and roll records and songs, basically blocking them from being anywhere near the top of the charts. But good news for a particular rock and roll album. Journey's greatest hits has now become the third album ever to log 800 or more weeks on the Billboard album chart, the top 200. Joining Pink Floyd, of course, Dark Side of the Moon, and more recently, Bob Marley's Legend. So kudos and congrats to Journey. If this is the messed up, screwed up system that Billboard is going to keep shoving down our throats, then I'm glad Journey took advantage of it. All right, usually we wrap things up in segment one with tour news, live concert news. So why would we change? Alice Cooper has added 12 more North American dates to his current tour. The new dates will run through July and August of 2024. The best double bill you will find anywhere. Take my word for it. Anywhere, anytime, any place. I saw this double bill last year and it was stellar. Extreme with Living Color. The Thicker Than Blood tour has added 15 more dates in North America in September of this year. And I am telling you, kids, if you have not seen either of these bands, getting them together is rock and roll ecstasy. Get out there, get tickets, find somewhere nearby and see Extreme and Living Color right now. Now, a band that I have talked about that I love, 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 another one that Eddie Trunk seems to admire and like as well, is Rival Sons. And I have said I want to see them as a headlining act. Well, guess what? I have now got tickets. It's a double headlining tour, a co-headlining tour. So we'll see how it plays out. And I will be the first to admit I don't know much about Clutch. But Rival Sons and Clutch, the Two-Headed Beast Tour, 25 North American dates in September and October of 2024. First half of the tour will feature support from Fu Manchu. Second half, much better, Black Stone Cherry. Now, if you're into Ringo Starr and his all-star band, we know they've had issues here in the past few years with health and postponements. Who hasn't, it seems like. But Ringo Starr and his all-star band have added 9 new September North American dates. Now, in terms of bands that are playing, vastly different types of shows. Let's put it that way here as we get to the end of News of the World. As we tape this show on April the 19th, these two references go back one day to Thursday, April the 18th. And again, compare and contrast, vastly different types of shows. Basically, both of them, most of us couldn't afford. Let's put it that way. If you're into the jam bands, let's start off with Phish. If you like your jam bands, you like your Dead and Company, who ironically are going to be playing the Las Vegas Sphere here next. Dave Matthews Band, Pearl Jam, Phish, last night, April the 18th, started their 4-night stand, not a residency, but they have a brief 4-night stand at the Sphere, just started last night. Supposedly going to change up their set list drastically each and every night. And again, I'm not a Phish guy, but the initial reports I read for the first show were phenomenal. They take full advantage of using the visuals in the Sphere. They play 2 sets with a break in between. So basically, you're going to get 3 hours of music plus a break. Phish is not a band that I really listen to, but I give them all due respect and credit for giving their fans their money's worth. Now, a band, I've talked about this in the past, Mark Tremonti better hold to his word in that he is not breaking up Alter Bridge in favor of Creed. But Creed played their first show together live for the first time in 12 years last night on a cruise ship. So you see what I'm going with here? You got Phish playing in arguably the greatest venue currently in the United States, and Creed playing on a cruise ship. But of course, we know that Creed is actually going out on tour here later on this year. I love Alter Bridge. I love Miles Kennedy. Scott Stapp. Never got the appeal of him or of Creed. But again, they played their first show together in 12 years last night on this cruise. I think it's 99 anniversary cruise. They didn't even play the song Higher in their set list. So we'll see what happens down the road when they start playing big venues. But that's going to do it for News of the World. A quick, cheesy music break. I'll be back with Breakdown. Welcome back to the Fortress of Rock here, episode 140 on April the 19th, 2024. I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane. You are who you are. And it is time for Breakdown, where we look at the best in new music because we need new music to keep rock and roll alive. That is the mission statement of the Fortress of Rock, to keep rock and roll alive. So we have a new album from Mark Knopfler, One Deep River, and a handful of songs, which we'll get to after our featured album review of the week. Now, we revisit a lot of themes here on the Fortress of Rock, and I'm not trying to be repetitive when I revisit said themes, but I like to hammer these points home because they are important. They feed into my overall view of the music I love, the music that we love. So when I talk about Mark Knopfler, I will refer to yet again, the group dynamic theory, which we have revisited time and time again here on the Fortress of Rock. And I am, again, not trying to be repetitive, but when the theme, when the point fits, you've got to hammer it home. I've talked about Mark Knopfler. I've talked about Sting. You could talk about Steve Perry, David Lee Roth. You pick your lead singer from a band that you love who went solo. And yes, you can find flashes of greatness. Sting definitely has fantastic solo songs and albums, as does David Lee Roth, but for the most part, the group dynamic is needed. You need the rest of the guys in the band. Whether it's an almost equal playing field like it was with Van Halen, or Dire Straits and Mark Knopfler, where he was the de facto leader but still needed his brother, needed Pick Withers and John Illsley to bring him together in an overall creative vision that made them all better. So this leads us into the latest solo album from Mark Knopfler, One Deep River. 12 songs, and of course we will go through, as we always do here on the Fortress of Rock, track by track. But keep in mind, Mark Knopfler's solo career has been, and I hate to say this, fairly dull. He will on occasion, and we'll see it here as we go through One Deep River, he will on occasion let his guitar genius push through, like he did with Dire Straits, and create magic. But without a band that could actually push him and challenge him, I feel like his entire solo career, and of course we're going back 30 years, has been for the most part fairly dull. I look back, and I am a big Dire Straits fan. I look back into my collection of CDs. Yes, you know, I have CDs. And I have the entire catalog, Dire Straits, as well as Mark Knopfler. You want to compare how often I listen to Dire Straits versus how often I listen to Mark Knopfler solo? We are looking at a 15 to 1, 20 to 1 ratio. I rarely, if ever, listen to any of Mark Knopfler's solo albums. Whereas I am always pulling out Dire Straits, Communique, Making Movies, Brothers in Arms, even Love Over Gold, and On Every Street. Because the group dynamic works. There's a reason why it works. People try to best each other. People try to collaborate, and the best of everyone's ideas melds together to create something special. And Mark Knopfler doesn't get that. And I hate to say it, Mark Knopfler does not get it. So we start One Deep River off with the one song that I've been praising here over the last month on the Fortress of Rock that reminds me of old Dire Straits. The magic, the collaboration, pushing the genius guitarist to come up with a brilliant riff and a brilliant song structure. Two Pairs of Hands still could be one of the best songs of the year for me because it reminds me of Dire Straits. It's got that nasty, slinky guitar riff, subtle, insinuous. And of course, Mark Knopfler doesn't give himself enough credit as a vocalist. Nobody's looking for Freddie Mercury. He does a great job with what he's got to work with, and he always has. He's never had the greatest voice, but he uses it to perfection, especially when it comes to telling stories, creating irony. So unfortunately, One Deep River uses it all up, almost all of it up, on the first song, Two Pairs of Hands. Now, luckily, track 2, Ahead of the Game, is pretty good as well. Now, this riff is very, very good. Not quite up there with Two Pairs of Hands. This does not sound like a Dire Straits song, but Mark Knopfler, ever since he's gone solo, has been more of a country guy. Folksy country music permeates his songwriting. And Ahead of the Game is the best of modern, let's say the best of modern day Mark Knopfler, whereas Two Pairs of Hands sounds like a throwback to his glory days in Dire Straits. Ahead of the Game sounds like this is the best current Mark Knopfler version. A little bit of country music in there, a solid guitar riff. Then the interesting thing that happens with the album as we go from track 3 through track 6 is Mark Knopfler, the storyteller, emerges. The lyrics become very detailed. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you have to have the music to match. So track 3 is Smart Money. And this has an almost Jimmy Buffett feel to it. The Smart Money ain't on your dog now. But he's singing about characters out on the West Coast, the Western US. Then track 4, Scavenger's Yard, continues the storytelling vibe. Much harder, harsher guitar with Scavenger's Yard. But through 4 songs, this is still a very, very solid, intriguing album. But then things start to fall apart. Track 5, Black Tie Jobs. There's strings in here, and this is where, for some strange reason, Mark Knopfler abandons his guitar work. And this is the first of, unfortunately, many songs to come where if you have trouble sleeping, you can put Black Tie Jobs on, and you will probably nod off within 90 seconds. And it pains me. It absolutely pains me to say that. Now things get a little bit better. Tracks 6 through 8. The storytelling part of One Deep River ends with Tunnel 13. Fascinating lyrically a fascinating song. It's almost a Western saga about bandit brothers. But then we get to track 7, Janine. If you've listened to Mark Knopfler's solo work in the past, and there are plenty of albums out there for you to delve into, Janine sounds like what I would say is standard solo Mark Knopfler. And then track 8 is Watch Me Gone. We've talked about that song here in the past on the Fortress. It's mournful. It's wistful. I think he made a mistake. I think Mark Knopfler made a mistake placing this song back among a bunch of other songs that sound the same. I think this would have stood out a little bit more if maybe he'd put it earlier in the album, maybe put this after Scavenger's Yard instead of Black Tie Jobs. Because if you're going to go nuclear on the second half of the album, go full nuclear. Don't waste a solid song like Watch Me Gone in the middle of this mess, because it brought it down. It just brings it down. And I think the song deserves better. Bad placement in the sequencing of the album for Watch Me Gone, because tracks 9, 10, and 11, boring, boring, boring. And when I say boring, I mean down tempo, no guitar, or very little guitar, no standout guitar hooks. Track 9, Sweeter Than the Rain. Track 10, Before My Train Comes, are nondescript. Nothing about them stands out. Nothing. Track 11 at least has a phenomenal title. And I thought when I initially saw the song sequence for One Deep River, I thought that this song's got to be fantastic. Track 11 is This One's Not Going to End Well. Somehow Mark Knopfler takes that phenomenal title and makes a boring song out of it. Fiddle is in it. Again, somebody has got to step up and tell him, stop recording music if this is what you're going to put out. Just stop it, because you're going to put people to sleep. Nobody wants to hear this. I hate to be this harsh about a man I love and admire one of my top 3 guitarists of all time. But if he's one of my top 3 guitarists, guess what I want to hear? I want to hear his guitar. And when he pushes his guitar into the background and thinks he's Bob Dylan, that's when things start to fall apart. Now, thankfully, to a certain extent, the final song, the title track, track 12, One Deep River, a little bit better guitar work and a little bit better songwriting, moderately catchy, to at least end things on a better note. But I've got to tell you, honestly, I'm going to be honest with you guys out there in podcast land when it comes to the music. Very disappointed. Very, very disappointed, especially given how much I loved the first 3 singles. Varying degrees, but still. Watch Me Gone, 2 Pairs of Hands, Ahead of the Game. When I heard those 3 songs, I thought maybe he gets it. Maybe he's finally going to pull back some of the intensity of Dire Straits. He's going to reach back and find that and bring it here into 2024, and he absolutely, on the rest of the album, fails miserably. And I'm sorry to have to break that news to you guys. I cannot recommend One Deep River unless you are an absolute diehard Mark Knopfler fan. Not a Dire Straits fan, a Mark Knopfler fan. Because I think if you're a Dire Straits fan only, this will bore you. I keep hitting that hammer over and over again. Hammer on the nail, hammer on the nail, hammer on the nail. Boring, boring, boring. And it's just a shame because you know what he can do. And I know he's getting old. And you tend to change things and you tend to tone things down. And maybe he can't. He doesn't have the finger dexterity. I don't know. But listening to this album, comparing it to his past solo albums, it's a pattern. It is a pattern. He tends to want to do the folksy, down-home storyteller stuff, a la Bob Dylan, Van Morrison, 2 of his idols that he references in the album. Sorry. Give me Skate Away. I want Tunnel of Love. I want Sultans of Swing. I want Lady Rider. Anything that reminds me of the greatness of Mark Knopfler when he was in Dire Straits. So let's do some songs. Let's try to bring up the mood a little bit. Try to find something positive here. I'm going to give you a bonus song review, something I did not think I was going to fit in. And I probably shouldn't, since we're going to review the full album next week. Rarely, if ever, do I do this. But the 3rd single from Dark Matter, Pearl Jam's new album, as I just mentioned. Full album review next week here on the Fortress of Rock. We'll talk more about it in segment 4. Wrap it up. I will tell you I have listened to it in its entirety a couple times. Very, very good. I'm expecting much positivity as I talk about Dark Matter next week. But Wreckage is the 3rd single off of Dark Matter after the title track and Running. So I'm going to sneak in a bonus bonus for you here. And you are not going to believe my initial comparison. You're going to think I've lost my mind. You're going to think I'm insulting Pearl Jam, and I'm actually giving them a compliment. Whereas Dark Matter and Running were all locomotive, drive it forward, rock and roll, ecstasy. Now, Dark Matter much better. A little bit of a punk rock thing going with Running. Wreckage is brilliant. Wreckage is brilliant, and I'll tell you why. And this is the part where you're going to think I am denigrating Pearl Jam, and I am actually giving them a compliment. Wreckage, the first impression I got listening to Wreckage was this sounds like Pearl Jam doing a Hootie and the Blowfish song. It's a beautiful, beautiful mid-tempo song with just an edge, just enough of an edge. It reminds me, again, going back to the days of Cracked Rear View. And remember, in a way, Pearl Jam and Hootie and the Blowfish are peers, as they both came up in roughly the same time when music was chaotic and going through a massive upheaval. And the bands went two different ways. Pearl Jam, of course, becomes one of the greatest, last great rock and roll bands coming out of the grunge movement. Pearl Jam was the counter with Cracked Rear View to that sound. If you listen to Wreckage, listen to the song structure, listen to the lyrics, and just imagine Darius Rucker singing this, you will not, I hope, I pray, you won't think I'm insane. But I am telling you, Wreckage is brilliant for the simple fact that it shows the range, how diverse Pearl Jam can get with their style, their songwriting. I am complimenting Pearl Jam. I'm complimenting the song Wreckage when I say it reminds me of 90s era Hootie and the Blowfish. Trust me, and we'll talk more about it next week when we do the full album review of Dark Matter. That being said, you can go listen to all of Dark Matter right now. So if I recommend Wreckage, what does it matter? Go listen to the full album. Judge for yourself. Now, we've been waiting for Collective Soul to finally put forth the first single from their upcoming double album, Here to Eternity. And boy, did they push it to the last possible minute, about 5 weeks out from the release of the album. We get the first single. I knew this was coming. I had seen bootleg videos on cruises. Yes, ironically, going back to what we talked about with Creed in segment 1, Mother's Love is the first release off of Here to Eternity. I will say that the best bands, Van Halen's done it, many, many other bands that you and I love have done it, recycle their best riffs. Whether they recycle them from early songs that they done that never made it onto an album, or maybe did later on. If you are going to crib and recycle music, don't steal it from somebody else. Just do a slight variation on your own stuff, for better or for worse. And that's what we get with the first single from Here to Eternity in Mother's Love. This guitar riff is directly lifted from arguably Collective Soul's greatest song, Where the River Flows. Now they dial it down, whereas Where the River Flows was a little bit harder edged, arguably one of their hardest rocking songs. Mother's Love cushions that riff a little bit, makes it a little bit softer, takes a little bit of the edge off of it. Not the greatest song I've ever heard from Collective Soul, and I am a big, big Collective Soul fan. I'll take it. Let's put it that way. It's better than most of the stuff out there. I expect more from them. And this scares me in that if this is the first single off a double album implies to me they were overflowing with ideas, catchy songwriting, catchy riffs, and if they have to recycle the guitar from Where the River Flows for the first single, I get worried. I'm a little worried. So if you're a Collective Soul fan, you will like Mother's Love. I don't think it will pull in any new fans, though, because you might as well listen to Where the River Flows. Now, we've been talking about this band, The Effect, for the last month or so. Kind of a super group. Nepotism involved here, definitely. Nick Collins on drums, of course, Phil Collins' son. Trev Lukather on guitar, son of Steve Lukather of Toto. Now, they've got a couple other songs out, but I have been focused on Toxic Envy. So that's a song we're going to review here as we break down our tribute to Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Past episodes, as I initially mentioned that we were going to review this song and talk about this group, great rock and roll logo. But the logo is only part of the image. And this band, The Effect, seems to be wrapped up a lot in image. It might be more style over substance. Now, Toxic Envy, the song isn't terrible. Serviceable. It's a mishmash of 80s rock, prog rock, of course. You might expect that with the background with Genesis, Nick Collins and his father. A little bit heavy on the keyboards. The thing that bothers me about this, now you can watch the video on YouTube. You can just listen to the song on Spotify or whatever your favorite streaming service might be. I would recommend just listen to the song because you watch the video and you will realize that the fatal flaw in The Effect might be the fact they have what I would call a quote-unquote pretty boy singer who doesn't really have a great standalone voice. This guy thinks he is the be-all, end-all. Let's put it that way. He thinks he's David Lee Roth, Jim Morrison, wrapped up into one, but he does not have the voice or the chops or the charisma to pull it off. At least from what I've seen with Toxic Envy. Now, the song itself is not bad. I would recommend you check it out. Let's put it that way. I'm not saying you're going to love it. I'm not saying you're going to like it. But there's an interesting dynamic there with all the keyboards, the prog rock, the 80s cheesiness. Time to go back in time, kids. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fortress of Rock, and I am dealing with an issue right here. Doc Brown is furious with me because he felt like I rushed the end of segment 2 and did not give a proper transition, his proper introduction into segment 3. Of course, I want to go back or look back at anniversaries of classic album releases, birthdays, and moments in rock and roll history. He felt like I rushed things, so let me clean it up a little bit for you. He's upset about the whole Dickey Betts thing. I told you he's got his black trench coat on instead of his usual white lab coat. I rushed at the end of segment 2. So, again, Toxic Envy by The Effect. Check it out. I'm not guaranteeing you're going to love it, but it's interesting, especially if you're a fan of early 80s. Yes, Genesis, GTR might be a good comparison. But of course, I have to acknowledge that we're getting into the rock and roll DeLorean. Are you happy now, Doc? Getting into the rock and roll DeLorean, traveling back in time, getting into the rock and roll time stream to look back at the influences, the people, the bands that made rock and roll what it is today. Okay, he seems a little bit happy now with that. So while he's concentrating on all the gauges and dials, I've got to take care of business. Now, unfortunately, we have officially lost another platform. So you found us somewhere. You're listening to us. So you better hang on to wherever it is you found us because the numbers are dwindling. I'm joking a little bit, but it seems like in modern society here in 2024, they take away, take away, take away, never give back. So, of course, we lost Radio Public here recently, and now we have officially lost Google Podcasts. But you can still find the Fortress of Rock each and every Friday night on Spotify, Pocket Casts, Apple, iHeartRadio, Overcast, Amazon Music, Castbox, and Audible. And of course, do not forget to check out the Facebook page. The Weekend Rock Project is up and running. Last week, we wanted long song titles. We wanted your best, your favorite songs, 7 words or more in the title. So now let's do the opposite. This is easier, but show some restraint. Don't just start throwing songs out there because you can. I want your best, your true blue best songs from the rock and roll era, your favorites, your best, with 1-word titles. For example, I could have thrown Layla out there. That was one of the first songs that popped into my head. But I don't think Layla is one of the greatest songs of all time. Blasphemy. Well, to me, it's not. It's personal preference and taste. You get on the Facebook page, you will see the 2 songs I started us off with. And you will know you will see them and go, yep, those are definitely Maestro songs. That's all I expect out of you guys. Just give me your personal favorite songs. 1-word title. And then, as great, as huge, as brilliant as my rock and roll mind is, I still need help. We all need help. We should never, ever, ever feel like we can't reach out for help. Segment 1, segment 3, especially, I have to find some ideas, some sources for the stories, the news tidbits, and I turn to ultimateclassicrock.com, thisdayinmusic.com, and the Van Halen news desk. All right. Doc Brown seems like he's mellowed out. He's got us in a good place in the rock and roll time stream. He is telling me to start with birthdays. April the 19th. We go back to 1956 for the birthday of Tony Martin. Now, unless you are a hardcore heavy metal rock and roller, you might not know who Tony Martin is. Tony Martin gets lost in the shuffle when it comes to Black Sabbath. He is not Ozzy Osbourne. He is not Ronnie James Dio, but he did sing lead vocals for Black Sabbath from 1987 through 1991, and again from 93 to 97. So you cannot dispute the fact that Tony Martin, a significant part of the history of Black Sabbath. Now we go back to April the 19th, 1947. We are so happy together, aren't we? Not really. Have you looked around lately, recently? Have you seen what's going on in the world? But the Turtles gave us the iconic hit, Happy Together. And one of the most important members of the Turtles was guitarist Mark Volman. And he was born on this day in 1947. April the 19th, 1944. Like to show a little bit of diversity here. No, not government mandated DEI crap, but because back in the day, back when I was growing up, we listened to all types of music and we didn't care who performed it. We just wanted good music. Again, born on this day, 1944, Bernie Worrell, keyboardist for Parliament and Funkadelic. Born on this day, April the 19th, 1942. Let's give some credit. Let's give some props to the guys behind the scenes, the guys, the gals, the women, the men who made it all work for the bands and the performers that we love. Born on this day in 1942, legendary engineer and producer Eddie Kramer. Now, Eddie Kramer produced classic albums from Kiss, as well as albums from Fastway and Triumph. Maybe more notably, an engineer on iconic albums from Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. And then finally in birthdays, April the 19th, 1942, same date as Eddie Kramer, Alan Price, keyboardist for The Animals. Of course, House of the Rising Sun, one of the greatest songs to come out of the 60s. So anniversaries. April the 19th, 2021. Known for putting together over the top, almost operatic rock and roll productions, including Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell, Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart. On this day in 2021, the late, great Jim Steinman passed away. On this day, April the 19th, in 2012, drummer and vocalist for the band, Levon Helm, died. Of course, previously they were the backing band for Bob Dylan, known after they split off from him. You got Down on Cripple Creek, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. On this day in 2012, Levon Helm passed away. On this day in 1986, April the 19th, I Just Want Your Extra Time and Your Kiss. How about that for lo-fi production value? And one of the worst voices of all time. Prince had the number one U.S. single with, yes, Kiss, which I still think doesn't get enough credit as being, it's one of the most recognizable songs of all time. Now, we've got a lot of stuff that happened on April the 19th, 1980. Blondie had the number one hit single in the U.S. with Call Me from the soundtrack to American Gigolo. A couple weeks ago, I talked about REM and their first live show. I don't want to call this a correction because I don't think I was wrong. Now, technically on this date, April the 19th, 1980, REM played their first live show as REM. What I referenced a few weeks back was their first live show, but they had not come up with the name, formally introduced themselves as REM. So I am not apologizing, but I am just making a clarification. And that all leads into the most important, in my humble opinion, the most important anniversary on April the 19th, 1980. It was a tragedy when we lost Bon Scott. And AC/DC was already, with him, a legendary, iconic rock and roll band, but one of the few bands, probably don't even have to go all the way through one hand, use all five fingers to tell me bands that lost an all-time great lead singer and then bounced back, recovered with a new lead singer to keep up their momentum and to still stay an iconic band. Van Halen, of course, but right up there with Van Halen would be AC/DC. And on this day in 1980, Brian Johnson joined the band AC/DC, we got Back in Black, and the world of rock and roll would never, ever be the same again. Back in Black still, to this day, in terms of impact and what it did to the world of rock and roll and how many musicians it influenced and impressed, to me, has to be top 5 all time in terms of legacy, in terms of impact when it comes to rock and roll albums. And again, think about that. How impressive is that? That Brian Johnson stepped in after the death of Bon Scott, after Highway to Hell, which in and of itself is a landmark album in hard rock. Brian Johnson steps right in and gives us Back in Black. And I've always been impressed with Sammy Hagar for how he stepped in and took over and gave us 5150, but that does not compare. And I'm saying this as a Van Halen fan, that does not compare to the feat that Brian Johnson pulled off with Back in Black. Now, every once in a while we'll dabble in musical stylings that are not necessarily hard rock, heavy metal, rock and roll. We talked here a few minutes ago about Parliament and Funkadelic. Love me some Glenn Campbell. Love me the late, great Glenn Campbell. On this day, April the 19th in 1969, the number one U.S. country song from the late, great Glenn Campbell was Galveston. And then finally wrapping up birthdays and anniversaries and all that good stuff. Doesn't seem like we can get through a week or two without talking about the Beatles, but you would figure that. April the 19th, 1965. One of the Beatles' best songs. Again, in my humble opinion. Big reason why I'm including this here this week, and I want to go back. Ticket to Ride was released as a single on this day in the United States. I've always been an early Beatles guy over a late era Beatles guy. There are good and bad in both. If you want to do the red versus the blue, have at it. I love Long and Winding Road, and I love Let It Be, but I also love Paperback Writer, Eleanor Rigby, and Ticket to Ride. 3 segments down here on the Fortress of Rock. But there is 1 segment left, and we have done a lot here recently to wrap it up, to make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more exciting for you to stick around. Our number 1 album, our top songs of the week coming up. And we have got a lot of new songs coming over the next few weeks to review. So you do not want to miss the final 15 minutes here of the Fortress of Rock as we wrap it up. Welcome back to the Fortress of Rock, 4th and final segment here on April the 19th, 2024, episode 140. I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane. Ecstatic, ebullient to have you aboard each and every Friday night with me to talk about the music that we love for roughly an hour and a half every Friday night. And you can always go back in the archives check out old episodes. But wrap it up. Segment 4, we look to the future. We've talked about the past, and I want to go back. We've talked about the present in News of the World and Breakdown, so now we look to the future. We've already got the rock and roll DeLorean shut down in the garage, pulled the drawbridge up over the moat. Doc Brown can finally shed his Dickey Betts black slicker in mourning in memory of the late great Dickey Betts. But we move forward. We have to always move forward. Remember that, kids. And as we move forward here on the Fortress of Rock next week, the next great album review and breakdown will be Pearl Jam, Dark Matter, episode 141, coming next Friday, April the 26th. As I alluded to earlier in this episode, I've listened to it, I've sampled it, and it is good. Now, over the next 2 weeks following that, we're going to take a break from reviewing albums. Partially because the concert season is finally beginning, and partially because I've got a mess of a week coming up in 2 weeks, so it's going to be very, very difficult for me to be able to give you a full album review, let alone a timely episode of the Fortress of Rock. So let me explain. In 2 weeks, which will be episode 142, dropping on May the 3rd, we're going to go with a different form of media. We're going to go with movies and TV and streaming. In 2 weeks, I will have a review of Bob Marley, One Love, movie that was recently in theaters, now on Paramount Plus, and I will begin my review of Disney Plus and Hulu's Bon Jovi documentary, basically because I've got concerts and I have jury duty. So it's going to kind of force me to do things earlier than I normally would. You'll still get your episode of the Fortress of Rock that week on time. I'm the one that's going to have to adjust. I will do things early and it'll all be good. Trust me. But those concerts I mentioned will come back in 3 weeks. Episode 143 on May the 10th, a double shot concert review for you. Judas Priest and Sabaton, and locally here what we call the Big Growl, featuring Fuel, Seether, and Saliva. Then in 4 weeks, we get back on track, get back to our normal structure for breakdown. Not sure yet which album I'm going to review. They both come out on May the 10th. So on May the 17th, episode 144, not sure yet if I'm going to opt for Kings of Leon or Sebastian Bach. But have no fear. Whichever one I don't review, the next week on May the 24th, that album will be on the slate. And then at the end of May, May the 31st, will be the Collective Soul double album, Here to Eternity. So you have your albums, concerts, movies, documentaries, all that good stuff, everything in the world of mass media, rock and roll melded together. Now, our tribute to the old days, back when the Billboard charts actually mattered, when they actually seemed like they were relevant and not corrupt. We bring you the Fortress of Rock, #1 album and top songs of the week. Little repetitive this week, I will admit, but it's going to get mixed up here very, very soon. So for the second week in a row, even though I really have issues with the album, because it was the one album that I really listened to the most this past week, again, second week in a row, One Deep River by Mark Knopfler is my #1 album. Again, despite the fact that I'm not a big fan and I feel like I got tricked. Let me just put it this way. I can pretty much guarantee that this is the last time One Deep River will be at the top of the charts when it comes to albums. 99.99999% chance I think that Pearl Jam will be #1 next week. Now, in terms of songs, we're going to get a little repetitive again. For the second week in a row, one of our top songs is Mother's Love by Collective Soul. I got a little confused on this last week. Second week at the top of our charts, non-consecutive. I think that's what threw me last week. Mark Knopfler, I'll say it again, very disappointed in the album, One Deep River, but I am not disappointed in the phenomenal song, Two Pairs of Hands. So, your top songs for the week here on the Fortress of Rock: Collective Soul's Mother's Love and Two Pairs of Hands by Mark Knopfler. But that is all I guarantee you 100% going to change next week. I mentioned that there were a lot of new songs, and this blew me away here today when I saw that all these new songs came out, in addition to some tunes that we are carrying over from past weeks that we were holding off on reviewing. They came out from all over the place. I'm not kidding you. So let's take a few minutes here to run down songs that we will hopefully be reviewing here, fitting in somehow, some way in the next 2 or 3 weeks here on the Fortress of Rock. Now, there were 2 songs that were carrying over from last week. Slash and Chris Stapleton, their cover of Oh Well. Of course, that is the second release from Orgy of the Damned, Slash's blues covers album. And then the Hold Steady. It just, I'm not sure what they're doing here with this standalone release. The Death of the Punchline we talked about last week, but now they've released the B-side, I guess, is what we want to call it. Radar and Leda. I was hoping this was going to be something of a precursor to a new album, but for now it's being released as a dual single. Maybe Record Store Day might have something to do with that. I don't know. But we will review The Death of the Punchline and Radar and Leda from the Hold Steady. Oh, and I mentioned Sammy Hagar earlier. So, of course, David Lee Roth got jealous and he had to release another new song. That's the way it seems. Right now, only available on YouTube. I find this interesting how David Lee Roth releases these new songs on YouTube, but not for the streaming services until 2 or 3 weeks later. So the new song from David Lee Roth is Scotch and Sofa. And we'll have that for you coming up on the Fortress. But now we get into all these songs that I discovered today within the last 12 hours. Kings of Leon already have released the third single. Split Screen seems like it just came out. But the Kings of Leon have put out Nothing to Do from their upcoming album, Can We Just Have Fun? And I have listened to this. This rocks. This could be one of the hardest rocking songs in a long, long time from the Kings of Leon. So Nothing to Do from Kings of Leon in the next few weeks here on the Fortress of Rock. Third single from Sebastian Bach, Child Within the Man. Interesting song. Again, I have sampled it. Hold On to the Dream. And it starts off like it's going to be a very cheesy power ballad. Get through the first minute, kids, and you will be surprised at how heavy this song is in a good way. Sebastian Bach's Hold On to the Dream in the next few weeks here on the Fortress of Rock. Now, a blues band, reminds you a little bit of Stevie Ray Vaughan, ZZ Top, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, The Cold Stairs. They've got a new song out called Horse to Water. And I'm always down for some good, solid, new blues, southern rock. Now, the last ones here. How did this slip under my radar? How did I not know that the deluxe edition of Lex Hives was coming out? You know I love the Hives. So now we have the deluxe edition of Lex Hives with bonus tracks, live tracks, 2 unreleased songs. And I am a sucker. You guys should know this by now. I am a sucker for vault songs. Unreleased B-sides, bonus tracks that never made the cut for an album. I am a sucker for those songs. So we have 2 coming off the deluxe edition of Lex Hives. High School Shuffle and Insane. We will have those songs for you here in the coming weeks on the Fortress of Rock. That is going to do it for episode 140. I told you, jam-packed, full episode. So jam-packed, I upset Doc Brown. Every segment barely filling in our allotted time. Our cheesy, transitional music that we're using now. I promise you, things will change. We've got a month here to figure things out. Spotify, our host platform, forcing us to do some different things, but you shouldn't really feel the effects on your end. What you should feel is the power and the glory of rock and roll. And I am the Maestro, Kevin Crane, as always. Very thankful and appreciative to have you aboard each and every Friday night. Love the one you're with. Not enough love in the world, so love the one you're with. Live every moment, love every day. We will talk to you again in 7. I'm the Maestro. Peace out.